If you only watch one story to the end today, let it be this one, because it begins with a girl no one noticed, wiping a ring of cold tea from a chipped saucer, and a single dad no one understood, standing in the doorway with a paper crown crumpled in his fist. What he asked her, quietly, as if he were asking permission to breathe, was not for money, not for help carrying a stroller up the steps, not for a discount. It was something stranger, softer, and far more dangerous. Will you sit with my daughter for 10 minutes and pretend this cafe is special? By the last minute of this story, when the lights in the cafe are different and the world inside their chests has shifted, you'll understand why those 10 minutes changed everything. Alina had stopped measuring her life in hours. Hours were too clean. She measured her days in napkins, damp, crumpled, stained with the colors of other people's moments. Morning napkins, catching the nerves of students who spilled sugar like confetti. Afternoon napkins, swallowing the gray coffee of regulars who were brave enough to look tired in public. Evening napkins, heavy with lipstick and the last foam of cappuccinos alone. Her hands smelled faintly of lemon and milk. Her world was the edge of a cloth wiping circles into wood until the grain shone. She was not nobody. She had once been a literature student with margins full of notes and reasons to wear bright scarves. But someone got sick, and then someone left, and then the rent trembled like a bad dream at the end of every month. She took the evening shifts because they paid a little more and because the quiet suited her. When the cafe emptied, you could hear the clock above the espresso machine cough every hour. She liked knowing when something turned. The owners called her Lena. The old couple who brought a chessboard called her Miss Steady, because her hands never shook as she carried the tray around their nights. Most customers never looked up long enough to call her anything. On the night this story begins, a dusting of rain turned the street into a watercolor. The glow from the cafe windows floated on the pavement like gold. Alina picked up a paper crown someone had left on a chair, one of those flimsy crowns you get from a cheap party store, shiny and stubborn. She smoothed it and set it on the counter, then moved to wipe down the tables before closing. The bell above the door chimed. She glanced up and saw him, a man with a rain-dark coat and eyes that looked as if they'd been awake for a year. He wasn't old, but he wore tiredness like a second jacket. He had the careful posture of someone carrying something precious. That something revealed herself when she peered around his leg, a girl of maybe 5, with hair in 2 brave ponytails and glitter sticking to her eyelashes like tiny stars. "Hi," the man said, voice gentle with apology. "Are you still open for a few minutes?" "We close in 20, Alina said. "Plenty of time for a coffee." He smiled, a small, grateful thing that felt like the first light over a hill. "Coffee for me. And, do you think you have a cup for pretend tea?" He knelt to his daughter. "Mira, say hello." Mira took in the room with the cautious curiosity of children who know what it's like to be turned away. "Hello," she whispered to the floor. "Allow me to prepare the finest pretend tea service," Alina said, "because if you're the last person still cleaning in a cafe, you may as well be the queen." She found a little white cup and saucer, the smallest one they used for espresso, and placed it on a napkin patterned with daisies someone had left in the storage closet last spring. She filled the cup with warm water and a thin slice of lemon. "Royal tea," she declared. "Best for princesses." Myra's eyes widened. "Real lemon?" "Very real," Alina said. "We are not savages." The father laughed. Quiet, sudden, like the sound of a door unlocking. He carried his coffee to a corner table under the window. Alina wiped a neighboring table and pretended not to watch as he folded a paper crown, the same kind she'd just rescued from the chair, and set it in front of his daughter. "Sorry about the theatrics," he said after a moment, glancing up at Alina. "I forgot to plan a birthday." Her mother, "We're not together. I keep getting the big parts right, the school forms, the doctor's appointments, and I keep missing the small, important parts. Today is important." She turned 5. He tapped the crown like it was a fragile instrument. "We were going to make a cake, and then my oven decided to be artistic and only heat on the left. Alina looked at the paper crown, at the small, earnest face under it. She had an ache inside her that had learned to be quiet. This ache knew the shape of missing people and late rent and all the small, important things that broke your heart more than the big ones. "We can do better than a crown," she said, and went to the counter. She found a slice of almond cake that the pastry chef, who claimed to hate sweetness, made on Thursdays as a kindness to himself. There was only one slice left. She checked the register, no one had bought it. She cut it in half and slipped the halves onto 2 plates. She lit one tea light from the candle jar kept by the tipped glass and set it between them like a secret moon. When she returned to the table, the little girl's face unlocked into a smile that made Alina's breath hitch. Children's smiles are made of belief, they turn a place into a place. "Happy birthday," Alina said softly to Mira. "Would you allow a waitress who is also an honorary royal official to hum you the birthday song? It would be a terrible scandal if we didn't." The father's eyes glistened. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, thinking of how thin the evening could feel for a child without promises. "I absolutely do." They hummed. Mira blew out the tea light like a champion flame. Thrower. The glow that rose in the little corner table flooded outward into the whole cafe, until the empty chairs felt less empty and the window glass seemed warmer. "Thank you," the father said in a voice that sounded both smaller and stronger, as if he'd set down something heavy between words. "I'm Zaid. This is Mira. And this is perfect." "Alina," she offered. "Names make people real. And this cake is biased, toward people who have survived 5 years in a complicated world." Mira pressed her palms to her cheeks. "Do we live in a complicated world, Baba?" "We do," he said. "But there are good waitresses in it, so that helps." Alina felt heat rise to her face, the kind that wasn't from coffee or the steaming dishwasher. He made the word waitress sound like lighthouse. The 10 minutes that followed stretched like a bridge. Zaid told Mira a story about a brave fox who lived under a cafe table and guarded crumbs like treasure. Mira whispered her wish into the tea light smoke. Alina didn't hear it, but she had the sense that it had the weight of a planet. When they stood to leave, Zaid hesitated. He looked at the room, at his daughter, at Alina's hands folded around a damp cloth. "Forgive me," he said, and the careful way he chose words told Alina he wasn't a man who often asked for favors. "I have a stranger request. If you have 10 minutes, only 10, and if it's not too odd, would you sit with my daughter while I make a phone call outside? She associates phone calls with bad news. With leaving. I want to call my boss and ask him if I can come in late tomorrow so I can take her to the park when it's empty. But she hears me on the phone and thinks I'm slipping away." He swallowed, the paper crown crumpled in his fist. "Could you sit with her and pretend this place is special? I'll be right outside the window." Alina's throat tightened. It was the way he said, "pretend this place is special," as if he knew that places could be changed by love. She nodded. "Of course." Zaid went outside into the rain that had thinned to a glitter. Alina and Mira sat at the table with the tea light wick still smoking. They played at counting the number of raindrops that raced each other down the window. They named them, brave, sleepy, fast, sneaky. Alina learned that Mira loved lollipops and disliked balloons. She learned that the paper crown was not just from any store, it was from the pharmacy where Zaid had asked for something that could fix a terrible day and bought the only thing that made sense to a child, a crown. Through the glass, Zaid's lips moved, his eyes on them, on the small warmth of one table in a wide night. He finished, put the phone in his pocket, pressed his palm to the window and smiled. When he came back inside, there was gratitude in him like dawn. "What did he say?" Alina asked. Zaid managed a grin that ached at the edges. "He said I could come in late. I told him why. He said happy birthday to the princess. And then he said I should bring coffee tomorrow because I am apparently the only dad in accounting, who understands spreadsheets and tiaras. Mira looked up, certain. He doesn't understand tiaras. No, Zaid said, breathing out a laugh. But he's trying. They stood, and Alina saw the moment stretch, the way strangers hover when there is both more and less to say. Zaid handed her the paper crown. Keep this, he asked. To remind you that sometimes, 10 minutes changes things. She almost declined. She almost said, you'll need it. But she felt the ache inside her lift its head, curious. I'll keep it, she said. But the princess can reclaim it any time. In the days that followed, Alina found the crown when she opened the drawer of spare spoons. She wore it for 12 seconds when she poured milk, just to see if it made the foam shine. She caught herself looking up whenever the bell chimed, a small search with no map. It turned out the world isn't so big when two people are meant to collide again. 3 days later, just before closing, the bell chimed. Mira ran in first, hair messier, eyes brighter. Zaid followed with a bouquet of flowers wrapped in brown paper. The stems were all different lengths, the bouquet looked like it had been built with love, not symmetry. For you, Zaid said, almost shy. For the royal official. This isn't another favor. It's a thank you. But there is something else. Alina held the flowers and tried to arrange her face into something that could hold this kind of kindness without spilling over. Something else? Zaid took a breath. Myra's school is doing a family morning on Saturday. Parents, plural, in most cases, come and read to the class. I plan to do it alone and teach them about spreadsheets, which would have been a riot. He smiled at himself. But last night, Mira asked me if our family is allowed to be different. She asked if our morning could have more people in it. He looked at Alina, not pleading, just honest. Would you come? Not as a mother. That would be too strange. But as our friend from the cafe. Will you read a story? She loves the way you make lemon slices sound like treasure. Alina's heart did something complicated. To be chosen by a child is a specific kind of miracle. But also, she thought of the landlord's notices lined up like accusations on her dresser. She thought of the last time she'd stood in a classroom, heart unburdened. Saying yes would stitch a bright thread into a night that had been all dark cloth. Yes, she said before fear could train her to be careful. I'll come. As the rain let up and night settled, a plan began quietly in Alina's mind, as plans do when your body remembers hope before your head. She would make the cafe more than a stop. She would ask the owners if she could hold a story night, once a week, something gentle and good for the neighborhood, something that cost almost nothing but time and lemon slices. She would start with one small thing that was simultaneously everything. She would tell a story that made a room feel like home. The paper crown watched from the spoon drawer, patient as a promise. Saturday was the kind of bright that makes the city's edges look honest. Alina woke before her alarm, not out of anxiety but because her heart had already stood up. She chose a blue dress that didn't apologize and a cardigan that remembered the shape of her body like an old friend. She tucked the paper crown into her bag, though she didn't plan to wear it. It was a talisman, a reminder that the smallest cardboard can hold the largest courage. At the school, families clustered with coffee cups and diaper bags and the kind of laughter that tries not to be loud in hallways. Zaid stood near the classroom door, smoothing Myra's hair and then deliberately messing it up again to make her giggle. When he saw Alina, his relief was evident and unguarded. It startled her, how good it felt to be someone's relief. You came, he said, as if she'd done something enormous. Maybe she had. Of course. Alina crouched to be eye level with Mira, who twirled like the dress she wore had taught her how. Your Highness, are we ready to conquer the world of picture books? Mira squeezed Alina's hands. I told Ms. Najma we brought our cafe friend. She said friends are family who arrive with stories. The classroom smelled like crayons and boiling hope. Parents took turns reading. Alina waited, palms warm, as a mother in a red scarf spun a tale about a brave bumblebee. Then Zaid went up and started to read about numbers that found friends in graphs. He read like a man who had taught himself to make anything sound like a lullaby if it was for his daughter. Then it was Alina's turn. She chose a book about a small fox who lives under a cafe table. She had found it in a second-hand shop the night before, as if the world had decided to be obvious. She didn't simply read, she told it. Her voice shifted and rose and laid down soft. She gave the fox a secret, gave the table a history, gave the crumbs names. Children leaned forward, teachers forgot to sip their tea, a father who had come in late stopped at the door and put his phone away. When she finished, the room gave a tiny, collective sigh, the kind of sound people make when their breath has been held without their noticing. Mira climbed into her lap without asking and whispered, "When you read, it feels like our house." "Maybe because stories are houses we carry," Alina whispered back, surprised by her own words and the way they fit perfectly. Afterward, in the hallway, something bureaucratic and practical intruded, a text from the cafe owner, a good man with a soft heart and hard math. "We're cutting shifts next month, Lena. Business is slow on weeknights. We'll keep you on weekends." "I'm sorry." The corridor blurred a little. She steadied herself against a bulletin board full of drawings, clouds as squares, suns as squiggles. The universe had good timing and bad timing in equal measure. She was about to be less employed and more useful in a way that didn't have a line item in any budget. She swallowed and put her phone away before the ache turned to tears. Zaid saw the change in her posture the way you notice a picture hanging slightly crooked. "Everything all right?" She considered brushing it off, but this was a story about 10-minute bravery. "They're cutting my shifts," she said simply. "I'll be okay." She tried to make the lie sit politely. It didn't. Zaid's brow furrowed. He looked at Mira, who was busy negotiating a sticker trade with a boy in dinosaur pajamas, then back at Alina. He seemed to be doing math in his head and choosing the variables that mattered. "Come," he said gently. "We're not done turning 10 minutes into something." They walked to the cafe together, the three of them, the way small groups sometimes become a procession without anyone declaring it. The afternoon sun turned the tables into shallow pools of light. The owners were in the back, relieved to see a few customers at the hour when chairs tend to look abandoned. Alina took a breath that scraped on the way in. "Can I try something?" she asked the owners. "Tonight. And maybe every Saturday if it works. Story night. I'll read to any kids who come in. We'll use the lemon slices. People can pay with a coin or a thank you. I'll take my shift in storytelling instead of wiping down tables for a while." The owners looked at each other with faces that had practiced worry and kindness. The woman half of the "we" smiled first. "We used to have poetry nights," she said. The city got louder. People stopped listening. Maybe we made it too complicated. She glanced at the paper crown peeking out of Alina's bag and grinned. "Do it." That evening, word spread the way good words do. Through parents texting parents, through neighbors telling neighbors while waiting for the bus, through children tugging sleeves and insisting. By 6, the cafe was fuller than it had been in months. A grandma ordered tea and stayed because it felt like church. A teenager came alone and pretended to read his phone but laughed at all the right parts. Zaid sat by the window with a laptop he never opened. He watched. Sometimes he wrote a line in a small notebook, and then he watched again, as if he were learning how to breathe in a different direction. Alina read. The fox returned. The crumbs became coins, then constellations, then moments that made children brave enough to ask questions adults had forgotten to ask. The room hummed. The register pinged quietly, like a heartbeat awakening. Lemon slices went missing and reappeared as tiny suns on saucers. During a pause, Zaid stood and approached the counter. He pulled out his wallet, then stopped. He put it away. Money wasn't the language he wanted to speak. Instead, he cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said to the gathered faces, which included the owners. Some old regulars, and 2 teenagers who had the moral certainty of very small philosophers. "I have a thought." Every head turned. Zaid's hands fluttered as if they wanted to fix a spreadsheet in the sky. "This place gave my daughter a birthday when I didn't know how. And today, it gave a room full of children the feeling that words can be furniture you sit on together. I'm a numbers person. I can't make stories, but I can make things last." He looked at the owners. "Would you allow a simple system? Pay what you can story night. And a jar, the Crown Fund, for anyone who wants to sponsor a lemon slice, a book, or a child whose family can't afford coffee but can afford wonder." There was a hush, then a murmur that turned into the sound of coins and bills finding a new home. A woman who had been quiet all evening put a necklace into the jar, a small pendant shaped like a star. "For luck," she said, shrugging at herself. "My mother used to tell me that you don't need luck for yourself when you're standing next to a child." The owners nodded. The Crown Fund began like all important things do, with the small noises of people being kind in public. Over the next weeks, changes unfurled. Alina's weeknights were still light, but story nights paid for more than lemon slices. People came who didn't have children, because listening felt like being the right kind of person. A local librarian donated books. The chess couple tried not to cry and failed. Once, a famous poet slipped in, sat quietly, and afterward told Alina that the way she paused between sentences made whole winters warmer. The 10-minute favor had become a bridge, narrow but sturdy, between lives that had been parallel lines. On one end stood a waitress who was not just a waitress, on the other, a single dad who learned that asking for help can be a kind of strength a daughter will remember when she measures her own courage. Not everything was soft. Zaid's boss changed, and the new one liked rules more than birthdays. Bills still arrived with their officious fonts. One afternoon, Mira came home with a picture of a family with stick figures and 2 big parents and a dog and no crown in sight. She asked if her drawing was wrong. Zaid's answer was careful and messy at the same time. "Some families are songs with 2 notes. Some are choirs. Ours is a melody that sounds like 3 chairs at a cafe table. It's not wrong. It's ours." They framed that answer and hung it in their kitchen made of second-hand blue plates. On a wet Thursday, mere days before the cafe's lease was to be renegotiated, the owner took Alina aside. "The landlord wants more," he said. "We can't do more." His face folded. "This place is a living room for half the block, but numbers. Numbers can be persuaded," Zaid said from the doorway, a little out of breath. He held up a file like a small flag. "If you let me try. For the price of a coffee." It turned out he had been running numbers the way Alina ran sentences. He'd built a business case story about story nights, about regulars who became advertisers more trustworthy than billboards, about foot traffic that turned into community. He sat with the landlord, a man with a tie that looked like a serious river, and told him that sometimes a cafe doesn't just sell coffee, it sells belonging, and belonging has a way of making rent easy to carry. The landlord, who had once been a father of small, loud children and had perhaps never been invited to feel useful in a negotiation, surprised himself by wanting to be the kind of person who made belonging possible. He adjusted the increase. It wasn't charity, it was recognition. The lease was signed while the espresso machine hissed approving steam. That night, the cafe filled beyond standing room. People brought folding chairs. Someone opened the window to let the laughter out to the street. Alina, trembling a little with the velocity of change, read a new story. This one about a girl who cleaned tables until she noticed the sky had been hiding on them all along. At a certain point, she put down the book, because the words that needed saying were bigger than paper. "I thought I was only good at wiping things away," she said. "But it turns out I'm good at leaving things behind, too. Lemon smells and fox stories, and a place where someone can come in from the rain and ask for help and not feel ashamed. She looked at Zaid, who met her eyes with a steadiness that felt like a handrail. She looked at Mira, who now wore the paper crown with the authority of someone who has earned it, not been handed it by the universe without effort. One day a father asked me to pretend this cafe was special, Alina continued. We all pretended so hard that it became true. After the applause softened, after the tea lights had burned to tiny suns, after the last chess game finished in a draw that felt like a win, Zaid walked up to the counter. He took a breath like a cliff dive. I have another question, he said, smiling in a way that said he knew 10 minutes could change lives, but so could the courage to ask for another 10. Would you, on some future Saturday, come with us to a park, then to a bookshop, and then back here, as people who are learning how to be important to each other? Not just for 10 minutes. For as long as is true. A hush of waiting spread. Mira bounced on her toes like a small bell. Alina could feel her future arrange itself around the words she could say. She had learned to be careful with vows, but she had also learned that careful isn't the same thing as small. Yes, she said, and the room exhaled joy. Later, when the chairs were lifted onto tables and the floors smelled of mop water and oranges, Alina opened the spoon drawer. The paper crown was there, a little more worn, a little more true. She set it on her head and laughed at herself, then didn't laugh because it didn't feel like a joke. They locked the door. On the sidewalk, the cafe's warm light walked with them. A few steps before letting them go. The future wasn't solved. But it was shared. And sharing, Alina had learned, was the kind of mathematics that turns subtraction into a kind of addition. At the end of this story, the part you are living now, if you've watched till the last second, remember this: the world is made of 10-minute chances standing at the door like shy acquaintances. Say yes to one of them. Pretend a place is special until it's truer than the pretending. Ask for help. Offer a chair. Light the teacup candle. And if someone hands you a flimsy crown, wear it until it isn't flimsy anymore. That's how everything changes.